Good morning, Scott. Thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day, your busy week to have a chat with me here. Um, I'm really excited that you have decided to grace me with your presence, the first of my series of podcasts. It's called Listen to Nothing. And I just want to talk to real people, real conversations, you know. And
You know what I realized is that that's the perfect name for a podcast with me is you're gonna be
uh,
listening to a lot of nothing.
No, no, no. No, I mean, I've been following you for a long time, through the Spit podcast, Boardroom Show, and I've seen you evolve. I've listened to you evolve, and there's something really intimate about listening to podcasts. I like that you and David are now doing the video podcast because now you join me in my living room. But like when I'm doing my laundry or cooking, I'm right there present with you guys, which is really exciting, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, so from what I understand, you're one of the pioneers of surf podcasting. That's what AI told me.
Well, I started doing this thing called internet radio in about 2005, and I was working at Surfer Magazine, and I had seen some other internet radio things, and I was a big fan of. I am still a big fan of sports and sports talk radio. And I would drive into work and I would be listening to sports talk radio and I was like, why isn't there sports talk radio for surfing? Like people want to
Mm,
talk about this stuff.
mm.
And so I started a surf talk radio thing at Surfer Magazine called I think it was called In the Lineup, the very
Ooh.
first one. Yeah, In the Lineup. Yeah.
And so, how was the evolution from that into doing the podcasting? How did that?
Yeah, so I did In the Lineup for a number of years and it was great because back then, people would walk into Surfer Magazine, like Andy Irons would walk in or Dave Rostovich or who, big time professional athletes excuse me, were walking through the halls. And so, we would try to grab them and sit them down and record. And eventually that led to here in San Diego, that was up in San Clemente. And here in San Diego, Rob Machado and his uncle Ed Machado were doing a surf talk show on
Mm,
terrestrial radio on Free FM 100, Free 100 FM or something like that. And of course, Rob was not around a lot because he was traveling. So Ed Machado called me and said, "Hey, will you fill in for Rob?" And I was like, "Yeah, for sure." So then I would come and fill in for Rob, and many times it would just be Rob and I and Ed, all three of us, and that was how I got kind of involved with terrestrial radio, and then that show left, and the producer of that show got me a surf talk show on another station, and those turned into podcasts. At that now we're talking about 2008 or 2009 or
wow.
something like that, and that's when they were like, "Hey, not only are we gonna do terrestrial radio, we're also going to turn these into podcasts so that listeners can find it in other distribution outlets."
Wow, that's fascinating. It's interesting you say, like, while you're working at Surfer Magazine, Andy Irons, Rob Machado, these guys who are quote unquote famous athletes, but really they're just pro surfers and no one knows
Yeah,
who they are. We know who they are,
I
you know.
know.
It's
No,
that's
you're
one of the beautiful things I love about surfing. And surf culture. Like down here in Waikiki, one day I'm sitting on the side of the car, getting boards ready, and Carissa Moore goes running by, and I'm like, "Oh my God, there's Carissa Moore!" And everybody's like, "Calm down, bro."
yeah.
But to me, it's a big deal. So you work
By
for,
the way, she would be wonderful for your show if you could get her. She's a fascinating, well, as you know her probably better than I do. I just know her sort of from what we see on, on the internet or whatever. But I have interviewed her once a long time ago when she was 14 or something like that. And she's just she seems like she fits the vibe of the show.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna reach out. Hopefully we get some different people. But I'm really interested, Scott. So you worked for Surfer Magazine. You had a show called Sacred Craft that transitioned into the boardroom show, and you seem to have either made a living off of surfing or made a life around surfing. How
Yeah.
did that come about for you? How did you make those decisions?
Well, I, you know, I will say this. I think that on some level, I just dreamed about it.
Mm,
I dreamed about being able to surf all the time. Like when
mm,
I was a kid, when I was a, 13, 14-year-old kid and surfing was my life and I didn't want anything to do except surf. All I wanted to do was surf. Um, I basically sort of had this dream, like I want to be able to surf whenever the waves are good. And it was sort of in the back of my mind. And I think, believe it or not, I think the power of that sort of helped to manifest where I am today. And I didn't realize that until now, looking back on it. But so I think there's something to be said for having big dreams and focusing on your dreams, even if it's subconsciously. And but to answer your question, so yeah, I sort of got lucky, right? There was a lot of luck. There was some serendipity. And so I got a job at Surfer Magazine. I was surfing down in Mexico by myself, and a group of guys came on this spot, and they saw me, and they paddled out, and it ended up being some photographers for Surfer Magazine, and Evan Slater and Steve Hawk. And
oh yeah.
at the time, I was going to college, and I was like, "Hey, do you need an intern?" And Steve Hawk was like, "Yeah, you know what? We could use an intern." And so he gave me his email, and I reached out, and I got hired, and so that was one of those serendipitous moments, right?
Mm,
And of course, from that, um, I worked at Surfer for 7 to 9 years, in the office for 7 years, and then an extended sort of associate editor type of position the last couple of years, which is when they fade you out. They fade you out. They go, "Hey, we love what you're doing, but we're thinking about maybe you work as a contractor," which is sort of code for, look, there's young people that are 20 something, you're 40, time for you to leave. And as much as you hate to hear that, it was probably a good thing. And so I got faded out of that.
mm,
And I had already started Sacred Craft, the Consumer Surfboard Expo. There was a void in the market for something like that. It basically started because of the Clark Foam shutdown. When Clark shut down in 2005, there was um, a lot of turmoil in the industry, and there was a lot of shapers that I knew that I surfed with every day that were, sort of losing work. The thing that filled the void of not having foam in the space was a lot of Asian boards, a lot of imported boards. And there's nothing wrong with those, but at the time, the surf shops, the retail shops were like, "We need boards." And so they were just getting boards from wherever they could.
mm,
And of course, you know, it was sort of a sad time because, like I say, shapers were sort of losing their place. They weren't getting space in the retail outlets, and they had boards for sale. So I'm like, look, let's just put on an expo. We can show off all of the handcrafted boards that are made right here in California, and help to support and sort of highlight these guys, because in my opinion, the surfboard shapers are sort of the they're the fabric from which this um culture sort of evolves, and
yeah.
you talk about all the great shapers, they're super important to us from the beginning guys all the way up to now. Those surfboard shapers and surfboards really tell the story of our history and our legacy and our culture. And so I started the Sacred Craft, and I hope I'm not getting too long-winded here, but
No, no, you're fantastic.
so I started Sacred Craft, and that evolved into the boardroom show. And the whole time we're just trying to illuminate and highlight surfboard builders and surfboards and the craft. And then, so everything's sort of, in many ways I've just been blessed. I
Mm,
really have been blessed, and I think that that's important to acknowledge, and I do acknowledge that, and so, these things have been put in front of me, and I've taken advantage of them. In other words, I've said, "Hey, let's do this." I've I believe that God honors action, and so I've taken action,
mm,
and, and yeah, so here we are today. I've got the boardroom show, and we've got the vintage surf auction, and I do the surf report on the radio here in San Diego on KPBS, and I have my fingers in a lot of stew to kind of keep the kids fed, so to speak, to
right.
keep the bills paid. And so far, it's been working out, and it's just really, it truly is a blessing. And yeah, I'm just, I'm in gratitude for sure.
Yeah, and I'm grateful to you because I've learned more listening to your podcast, listening to you guys talk about um, surfboard design, fins, all these different things. Um, as a kid, for me, one of the things I liked to do in the summertime was just go hang out at the surf shop. I grew up on the East Coast, and there was a surf shop in New Jersey, and I just loved the smell of the resin, the wax. Like to this day, I still use Mr. Zoggs just because that smell is so nostalgic for me. Everybody goes,
Yeah.
"Oh, we got to use these different things." Um, but there's some really interesting points that you said. One, you said vision. You set yourself a vision that you're gonna make a life around being able to surf, which I think is really interesting, and I want to dive into that because a lot of people set up their life. I'm going to work this job, and then I'm going to be able to buy that house, and I'm going to be able to get the surfboard, and I'm going to be able to sit by the beach, and surf. But instead, you've manufactured, so to speak, or you've invited, manifested, I think is a better word, a lifestyle that's allowed you to stay connected to the ocean, to the craft that you love of the surfboards, and paying homage and respect to people. I think there's a level of humility there that allows this to continue to manifest for you.
Yeah, for sure. There's parts of my life that we can't talk about here because it's just not appropriate for what I do. But there
Mm,
are things that I do that I believe that if I did not do them, that I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And so I kind of feel like if I just continue to do those things, which in some way is of being of service to my fellows,
yeah.
um, good stuff seems to manifest itself. Now, going back to my original vision, I for sure had that vision. I can recall specifically one of my brothers saying, "What is it that you want to do?" When I was like 16 or whatever, and I was like, "I just want a little house in North County, San Diego, and be able to surf all day." And lo and behold, as I look back on it 35, 45 years later, I have a little house in North County, San Diego, and I get to surf, pretty much whenever I want.
It's
And
beautiful.
and it made me realize, and in fact, I told my kids the other day, I sent them a text. I'm like, "Hey, dream big." Like, you know, I mean, I'm happy with my dream that it's come true for sure, but I sometimes think, wow, if I would have dreamt a little bigger, but, but that's awfully selfish, which is a huge part of who I am. I've got a very self-centered nature.
Well, I think we all do. I mean, our ego is set up to help us survive, but then that ego tends to get in the way at times, and it's that balance. It's that going back and forth, and you know, we all we all have to trod the path that we do and learn and be willing to learn from the mistakes, learn from the stumbles, and not get held up by them and move forward. But I think it's pretty amazing that like you dreamt, but you manifested because you saw these opportunities. You're out in the water, you know, and these guys come in from Surfer Magazine. Hey, do you need it? You saw an opportunity and you jumped on it. You didn't sit there and go, "Oh, I should say something," and then like 20 years later, sitting on your rocking chair with your lemonade, going, "I shoulda." shoulda,
Yeah.
woulda, coulda. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's I find really fascinating. Um,
Yeah,
so I
it
have
was interesting because it like, literally, I didn't know who they were, and I was on the rocks with one of the guys, and I looked on his board, and it said Steve Hawk, and I was like, "Oh, this is" because I didn't know what Steve Hawk looked like, back
yeah,
then,
yeah, yeah.
you just knew the name, I was like, "Oh, you're Steve Hawk from Surfer Magazine." He's like, "Yeah," and then immediately, I started talking to him to
That's so funny because I would have been like, "Oh, you're Tony's brother."
well, I tell you what, to this day, I owe, big, thank you to
Mm.
Steve Hawk for hiring me there at Surfer Magazine because 'cause I'm not sure I was the best hire for as I look back on my years there, I'm sure they could have done better.
However, Scott, in a way, you probably are the best hire because look what you're doing today. You're continuing, like they used to have spreads about boards and things, and those magazines don't exist. And what are you're doing? You've created this industry show where people are flying in from all over the world.
Yeah, yeah,
You
that's
know,
true. Yeah.
that's really cool. And like when I tell people here that, you set this up, you have a shaping bay in there, there's bleachers. I have yet to be there, but I've watched the YouTube, I've listened to you guys enough to feel like I've been there. People are like, wow, that sounds so amazing. I mean, the number of people that surf that don't know how a board is designed is pretty fascinating, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably getting bigger too, I sense, right? That there's been such a great influx of newbies, for lack of a better phrase, that, I think it's important to continue to tell the story, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and that's what you're doing. So
Yeah.
I got a question about so Nat Young wrote a book, The Church of the Open Sky. Andy Irons said that being in the tube was like being kissed by God. I don't know if you read James Nestor's book, Deep, but a really interesting book about how being in, near, or around water changes our psychological makeup. And in that book, he says that he compares the ocean water similar to our blood and what is it, amniotic fluid? It's similar to amniotic fluid. So I've been thinking about that a lot lately about the spiritual side of being in the water, being, a wave rider, a surfer, whatever you want to call it. I'm just curious your thoughts, your connections with that.
Yeah. Um, well, I'm fascinated by all of that stuff, right? It's sort of, for no pun intended, but it's pretty deep stuff, and it's probably deep stuff that, I'm not super qualified to talk on, but I believe I don't think it's any big secret that being in the ocean has a spiritual sort of, um, I don't know what the word is, but it's spiritual.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of when you go to Yosemite or you go to
Mm,
Yellowstone or anywhere you go in nature. I
mm,
think, our culture now, it's like, look at me, like you and I are inside this room, like we're not outside, like digging up weeds or whatever, which is what our DNA, our forefathers did forever. They were just outside, you
mm,
know? So anyway, to get back to what you're saying, I do believe getting in the ocean, there's something about dipping your head in the ocean and rinsing off and being there that just makes you feel more connected.
mm,
And I often tell people, and I did this just the other day, how did you feel when you got out of the water? Like some people don't, you know, I rarely see anybody that gets out of the ocean that isn't happy.
mm,
Like, that isn't happy. There's sometimes and I'm a great example of this too. I don't realize it, but I'm like, "Wow, I'm feeling really good." Like, "Let's go eat lunch," or whatever, like, I'm just stoked.
yeah.
And and I've often thought, "Well, why is that? Like, what is
Mm,
it? What is it
mm,
that" was it actually the riding of the wave, or was it that I was in this amniotic fluid, God's amniotic fluid, And, I'm not sure. I'm sure you've heard me say on some level, um certainly subconsciously we survived, right? Because when we go in the ocean, we are going into the food chain.
Mm,
And I think that there's that, right? There's the idea
mm,
that, oh my God, I've survived. And so you're pretty excited when you survive. Now
mm,
that might just obviously just a little bit of it, right? And then there is, look, we're exercising, so there's all these fluids in our brain that are, getting released because we're doing the exercise. Our heart rate is up. And then there's, as you very well know, and all of the listeners know, is that there's a lot of quiet time where we sit.
mm,
And what's really interesting is that many times we're sitting with our fellows. How many times we've sat at sunset and there's 15 guys in the water, guys and gals, and everyone's quiet. The waves aren't that good. There's a big lull, and everyone's just quiet. And you don't realize it. I mean, you realize that you're quiet, but everyone's quiet,
yeah.
but we're close. And so there's that really neat thing that, again, I can't even explain it. I don't know what it means ethereally, how we're all sort of quiet together and if that means anything. But so there's that period of meditation, which is super crucial, which I know is something that you're a big fan of. I'm a big fan of it too. I wake up in the morning and spend quiet time before I do anything.
Mm,
Except for I will go to the bathroom. And then I sit and I do quiet time. And then I get into some other stuff, some other stuff that kind of sets me up for staying on the beam for the day. But to get back to what you're saying, there's something spiritual about it. I've tried to explain it as best I know, and I think there's some different levels to it. So there's the food chain, there's the quiet time, there's the exercise. And oh, by the way, Tom Morey will tell you, look, we're riding these waves. Like the energy of riding waves is pretty fascinating, and that like translates through our feet into our bodies. And I'm sure that there's that part of it too that I'm not even focused on yet. But when you think of sound waves and energy waves and physical oceanic waves, like waves are a thing. They're happening right now all around us, and be able to tap into that and to ride that is pretty
mm.
cool, and I think it led to the shortboard revolution. I mean, we're constantly trying to get to smaller and smaller so that we can just be on our feet without a board between us riding waves, which is why, in some regard, body surfing is so fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really you hit on a lot of really interesting points I hadn't thought about. Um, when you said that we're sitting there in quiet time, I'm thinking of, birds before the sunrise or just before sunset, and then there's something else about, challenge, like so as you mentioned, I'm a big fan of meditation, so I sit meditation, but when I sit by myself, there's no eyes on me. You know what I mean? But like one of my biggest challenges in the water is to surf like nobody's watching. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I always have to confront especially when I go to a new spot and I don't know where the break is. I don't know who the big dog is. I don't know who the loose cannon is. I got to feel my time out. But there is that, I think if you can connect and not raise your vibration or match the vibration of them, but match the vibration of of the ocean, and that time out there, then you're going to be, you know, like Kelly, just like the wave is going to come. It's going to manifest itself. And that's pretty much what happened to you, I think, with your trajectory in life.
Yeah.
You set that vibration, and you tuned into wrong channels here and there, but you kept, getting back on course, going back to the North Star.
At one point, my TV was completely unplugged. I was off this. I got myself into some trouble,
Yeah,
and got out of it. Thank God.
that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's something interesting too about what you're saying about like body surfing and you mentioned some surfers like Rob, but Dave Rostovich has he has some connection. He's definitely a water person. He refreshes. It's interesting too because in spirit, there's baptism. There's things that take place in the water. And you talked about feeling different and recognizing that difference when you come out. I think that that's really important for us to, you talk about your gratitude for these different things. Just, hey, I was in the water for an hour. I was in the water for 2 hours. I got two, three waves. Or I just had a board meeting with a bunch of people. We got to sit out there rather than in an office somewhere, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and just keep that stoke alive, keep spreading that stoke.
Yeah. I hope that you'll be able to get Dave on your show sometime because he's a he really is like a fish in the water. I've I've been lucky enough to see him surf a few times in person. But the one thing that blew me away was I've seen him body surf in person, and the guy is like a dolphin. Like I can barely like catch the wave, and I'm kind of half drowning and stuff, and I'm trying to keep up. And he and some other guys that I was with were just ripping, like like surfing it like a dolphin, like coming out of the ocean, and just amazing. So, but yeah, he's I think he too is from sort of a spiritual angle, he'd probably be, enlightening.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I've got a kind of oddball question for you. So I recently attended a paddle out, and I'm sure you've been to paddle outs before. And the priest giving the service talked about, see you in the ocean, and then I was talking to a beach, but there's a beach boy that actually is same birth date as mine, but 20 years my senior. And so I was talking to him, and he talks about, oh yeah, I put him in the ocean and I put him in the ocean. Is that here in Hawaii, there's that connection, of going back into the ocean. And then when you're in the ocean, you see them again, you're with them again. What are your thoughts on experience
Mm.
or about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that when people who pass away that you love, when they pass away, obviously they're not there, but I don't think that I think that they're with you always.
Mm,
There's a, I wish I still have it. It's somewhere on my phone, but it's either an old prayer, or an old poem that basically says, "Hey, don't worry about me. I'm with you all the time. I'm going to be with you forever. I'm in your memory. And I think there's a lot of truth to that.
mm,
When we think of loved ones that have passed away, for instance, in my case, my mom, or maybe one of my dogs, it's they're still there. Like they're vivid. Like I
mm,
can see them right now.
mm,
And I can talk to them. You know, and yeah. So going back to the ocean, I think it's a really cool thing that we do. As
mm.
surfers. To have those paddle outs and to put those people back into the ocean. I often wonder about them though from a like there's something about a paddle out that seems I don't know, I think unless I really know the person well, I don't really want to do the paddle out. I don't want to be seen. I don't want to
Mm.
be seen. You know what I mean? Like it seems kind of like I don't know. I I can just do my own personal paddle out. But there's a funny I don't know if you watch Larry David's Curb Your Enthusiasm or not, but there's a great episode where Albert Brooks has a he has a memorial for himself before he's died. He's like, "You know what? Those things are lame. You should have people show up and talk about how great you are while you're there. If you're dead in a box, you can't hear them say all the good things."
Right, right.
I I thought was pretty funny. But anyway, I
Yeah. No, it's an interesting perspective. Um, but while you were talking there, I remembered a little bit what I wanted to say about being in the water and the quietness and all these other things. I think also time kind of changes. You know what I mean? Like when we get that ride, we feel like that wave was really long. And
yeah.
then you look at the clip and it's 15 seconds, or 20 seconds, but it feels like an eternity. There's
Yeah.
something there's something really magical there. And I think that transcendence of time and a separateness, like we're interconnected, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. You said earlier you were mentioning this concept of surfing as if nobody's watching. And frankly, I don't think my ego even lets that happen. I think I'm constantly worried about how I look, and I'll just be blunt. I think but I think that when it seems longer, it's because you are actually kind of focused. You're having sort of a Zen moment with the ride. You're not like, I wonder if anyone's watching this, you're more like just you're in that Zen state. You're just kind of as one with the ride. And I think that's probably when the wave seems a little bit longer.
Mm. Yeah, that's my goal to to surf like no one's watching.
Well, the good news is I hate surfing with people in general. So I'm
Yeah,
always finding myself off to some other, less than spot so I can be alone, and so
yeah, yeah. There's an interesting camaraderie about it too. Like I have a few local friends and I paddled out with them to really local spots and I just sat on the side forever. And then, one of the guys paddled up to me. He's like, "Hey, bro, you're gonna get sunburned. Get a wave." And then everybody else just stopped and let me get a wave because I
yeah.
sat, I sat in the side for so long. Um, but there's also, do you, as you get older, do you find you get like a little uncle pass out in the water, or is
No,
California a different place?
California is a different place. There's actually, it's hard to say. I actually recently I did have some kids go, "Hey, man, you can go on any wave you want," but I don't know, I don't know why. But for the most part, I think it's a little bit of a meritocracy
Mm,
here. It's like if you're good, go get it, and if you're not going to get it. And I think that's okay on some level. And I think that's why there are spots where there's a lot of old longboarder dudes, and there's spots where there's a lot of red hot 20-year-old guys on tri fins. And that just happens as you get older. I mean, there was a period of time when here in San Diego, if you're in your 20s, you're basically surfing blacks if you're really engaged, because blacks is always way better than anywhere else. And then as you evolve in age, as you get older, you end up not surfing black so much, and you end up
mm,
going up to different spots that are a little bit friendlier and easier to deal with. And then before you know it, you're at San Onofre. It doesn't take long.
yeah, yeah. It's an interesting sport. You
Yeah,
know. So let's circle back to your. How are you on time?
I'm doing good. I got a
Okay,
hard out at in like 20 minutes.
okay. Um, your practice. So you said you get up, you take quiet time, you do your other things. Would you mind talking about that and how that, kind of shapes your day?
Yeah. Yeah. So I, I meditate. I try to meditate on, I don't know if I'm not, I don't know how to do it. You know what I mean? And, and so I read a book by a guy named Eknath Warren, and
Oh,
he is,
yes.
you know him? Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he's a teacher at Berkeley, and he's written a bunch of books, as you know, one of them, most of them called Meditations on some level. And one of the books he wrote focuses on the prayer of St. Francis. And
Mm,
so I try to, and in his opinion, in his scholarly opinion, that's the best prayer he thinks to meditate on. And in the book, he talks about reading it as slowly as you can possibly recite it very slowly. If you mess up, go back and start over and just recite that prayer of St. Francis over and over. So that's what I attempt to do.
mm-hmm,
But I also have a word that I try to focus on in more of a transcendental meditation kind of thing,
mm,
whereas I just kind of repeat the same word over and over. And I fail at all of these things. I don't know if fail's the right word. I don't think that there's a right way or a wrong way. I definitely don't think you can fail. I often tell people that I'm talking to, the only way you fail is not try. If you don't sit down and try, then you fail. But if you sit down and be quiet for a while, you've done well. And it's weird because meditation, we have this, I have this sort of Western, like, if I do this, then I get that transactional thing with meditation. Like, oh, I'm supposed to now be a yogi because I've been doing, no, like you're lucky if Scott's lucky if he can not talk in the third person. No, if I can just, be quiet for a little while, perhaps I will succeed. But so my meditation manifests, well, it takes form and it takes different forms, right? Um, and and sometimes lately I just watched this movie. It's actually been nominated for an Academy Award, I believe. I forget what it's called. It's a really fascinating movie. And I apologize for not knowing what it's called, but at some point in it, the character in the movie talks about meditating on it's called The Man Who Could Read Without Seeing. It's
Ooh.
something like that. The Man Who Could Read Without Seeing, or something along those lines.
Mm,
And it's about a guy who can see with his eyes closed or something like that. Anyway, he talks about meditating on one thing, and this particular thing is a candle, the flame of a
mm,
candle.
mm.
So lately, I've been trying to focus on the flame of a candle, which is very difficult. And in fact, I found myself this morning focusing on a golf ball because the flame of the candle was too difficult, and I focused on a golf ball. But so anyway, the bottom line is I do not know what I'm doing, and I'm okay with that. But the point is that I'm doing it, and
Yeah.
I've been doing it for a long time every morning. And sometimes I'm very connected to sort of a God consciousness, and other times I'm not, and that's fine too.
Mm,
And then I go into prayer, and so I have some prayers, some sort of stock prayers, and they change. And my latest one is, give my body strength, give my mind sharpness, and give my heart and soften my heart. I think that's the
mm,
big one for me is I
mm.
need to learn to soften my heart, and because I'm a judgment machine, like, I mean, my ego, it's like the Excalibur of my ego is my judgment sword, because it makes me feel better, bigger and better than you if I can judge you,
Yeah.
and it's just it's a default, on some level I often would think, oh, well, that's a character defect. And now it's actually a default. That's a default position for me, is to judge. And and it's all based in fear, and it's based in insecurity. And the more that there's acknowledgement of that for me, the more that I can do some sort of inventory,
Mm,
and go, okay,
yeah.
okay, I'm behaving like this, and I'm behaving like this because of fear. And what is the fear born out of? Oh, it's an insecurity because of this, or it's, you have something I want, or you're going to take something that I have.
Yeah.
There's all of these things that I'm trying to acknowledge and move away from, so that when the day progresses, I can be somewhat on the right beam, so that I can move through the day with unconditional love and kindness, and be a better citizen and a better human to my fellows, so that that can then spread like, a seed for everyone else,
Yeah.
and I'm good for about 10 minutes. By the time, the morning's moving through, I'm in, the bondage of Scott is in full force, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, you're not alone in that. But it's I would venture to say that that judgmental side or whatever those things are, they're not defaults and they're not faults. If you start to recognize them, which you have, you're recognizing it as a part of you that is a hindrance now. It may have served a purpose at some point. We need to survive, we need to do these things, and as humans, we're like other animals, we're territorial. We lock our doors, we build fences. We're afraid of whatever's out there. And I think that the whole pandemic has spun that out. And but I've listened to you on the podcast, and I've noticed over the years a softening, and an allowing in, um, like, yeah, it's really quite beautiful. And that's why I wanted to get you on here to talk to you about that aspect of it, because you're not afraid to talk about it. A lot of
Yeah.
people, this is this is the fearful thing, to be intimate, to be vulnerable, and no, it's a sign of strength, you
Yeah, I think
know.
part of the softening that occurs probably with all of us is just aging, as I've gotten older, it's taken me a long time to get to maturity. I'm not even close, but it took me a long time to just acknowledge that I was a selfish jerk, you know? And and there's been some humility that comes with that. And I love. Humility is a fabulous thing,
Yeah.
What's a problem, well, not a problem, but what has occurred is humility through humiliation. And,
Mm,
that was just part of my growth,
yeah,
I had to be humiliated before I realized, "Oh, you know what? Let me turn this thing 180 degrees and look at, let's instead of prosecuting them, let's prosecute you and see what your part in all of this is
yeah,
and acknowledge that and then go, make it right if it needs to be made right, and then move through the day with some sense of goodness,
yeah.
But again, I often fail, more
Well, we
often
all
than not.
do. I mean, because it's such a, you know, but all spiritual leaders is it interesting. Well, I'm jumping around here. I just want to address it's not. What was the word you used? Put yourself under investigation or persecution or whatever. It's more like the fact that you recognize it and then you say, all right, this is an area, this is my weakness. This is an area I need to improve is huge. Many people get into their 80s and never look at this. They shelve it, and then it comes out as a some sort of illness because they haven't addressed it. But you've taken the time, you've addressed these things slowly, you're pulling back the veil, and you're seeing that, you know, we humans are beautiful. We have all these faults, but
Well, let's be clear because I didn't have some, like, moment of enlightenment, or actually, maybe I did, but my
you have.
point is that I was forced to do this. I had pushed myself to such a place in my life that I basically raised my hand and said, "Show me what to do.
Yeah,
Show me what to do." And so ego and my selfishness drove me to such a low spot that I had to raise my hand. So it wasn't like I was moving along through my life and going, "Gosh, you know what? It'd be great if I got better." It was more like, "Holy shit, you're a complete scumbag. You have to. There's only one way, and that's up because you've gotten as low as you can
yeah,
possibly get."
yeah. Well, I mean, don't be too hard on yourself because it definitely has brought you to a place. You know what I mean? You've learned from it. You chose to look at that, um, and it's beautiful. I respect it. I think it's amazing. I know a lot of people who are just angry people,
Yeah,
and they refuse to look at our eyes go out. That's natural to look out rather than to go in and every time we go in, we get a little bit better. But but it's funny, you talk about the judging mind. I was going to write an article about spiritual test kits at Walmart that they sell them there because sometimes I find myself like I sit in my meditation, I journal, I read some passage, and I think, oh boy, I really got it. And then I go there and I start judging people, and I'm like, yeah, you don't have it.
yeah,
You're but I think it's in
yeah.
that moment. It's in that moment of coming back that we can look and be compassionate with ourselves and humorous with ourselves, you know.
Yeah,
Wow.
I told somebody the other day, I said, "Look, the surf zone going surfing is this place of the most amount of spiritual growth and spiritual retardation." And I think that can be true of Walmart or Trader Joe's as well. Like, I'm either gonna do this right or I'm just gonna leave there just a complete nut job.
Yeah. Well, beautiful. Beautiful. Well, I commend you, Scott. I really appreciate everything you do. I think I don't know if you get enough recognition for the boardroom show and the
Well, let me
podcast.
say that the I appreciate that. Thank you very much. But the boardroom show is as you know, it's about recognizing the shapers and the builders and the stuff. I open the doors and I let all those guys come in with all their good energy, and I, you know, I
But you
thank you, but
organize it.
I
You
don't. I know,
organize
but
it and you
listen,
believe in it and
yeah,
you've created this thing where people go, and it's
yeah.
creating more of an appreciation, for the surfboard craft.
You know what's cool is Bob McTavish. We're honoring Bob McTavish this year. And that's one of the really fun things about the show for me is I get to meet these guys that are just super sweet and super legendary and they're just stoked, like, so to be able to have spent time with Wayne Lynch and Dick Brewer and Jerry Lopez and Mark Richards and Simon Anderson, to be able to spend close quality time with them.
Mm,
And there's a host of other guys that I haven't had time to mention here, but that's been a real fun blessing for me,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, you've actually created, it's kind of like a mecca type thing. You mentioned Dick Brewer, 2000, I think it was 2017, the opening ceremonies of the Eddie Aikau. I went out there and I took my hard copy of Encyclopedia of Surfing, Matt Warshaw's book, and I saw Dick walking by and I asked him, I said, "Hey, would you mind signing my book?" And we put it out on a table. And I said, in the late 80s, I had a 6'6" Brewer thruster. And he stopped what he was doing, put his hand on this, and he looked at me and he goes, "How did it work for you?" That's all he cared about was how the board worked. Which I thought was amazing. I wished in that moment, I wished I still had it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great anecdote.
But
That's
it's really
perfect.
cool.
Yeah, that's Brewer.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Scott. I look forward
Yeah.
to meeting again, you
I'm
know.
confused on how to um what name to call you by.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Shukin?
Shukin, Mark. So, here's the thing. Shukin is my Buddhist name.
Okay.
So, and I spent 15 years in Japan. So, Shukin being a Japanese name, that was the name that stuck. So everybody
I
from
like
there.
Shukin. Shukin flows off comes out of my brain easier.
Well, the thing I think is interesting too is that you guys pronounce it correctly, just
Oh,
going by the written thing. Um,
yeah.
so that's really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I go by, of course, it's not on my driver's license. So since I came back to the States, I've incorporated Mark, but I still go by Shukin.
Yeah, yeah.
My
Cool.
mom calls me Shukin. My sister calls me Shukin. So
So does your friend Scott.
yeah,
I'm gonna
exactly.
I call you Shuk.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for taking the time and
Yeah.
see you in the water, hopefully.
Okay, bud.